It's like, I know that you weren't doing this to make me better.
Yeah.
I know that you weren't doing this to try and benefit me. And yet,
yeah.
in reflection, it's like alchemy. It's like how Rory Sutherland calls it alchemy, taking something that was bad. I had this reflection as well.
We've learned, my family's learned, like when a public attack occurs, there's a massive opportunity nested in it. If you can reorient, it's like, okay, this is bad. This is vicious. This does not look good. And maybe it could take me out, take us out. Is there a way we can play with this that will not only neutralize it, but twist it in the other direction? I think the thing we did that was most effective on that side of things was when I was written into Captain America as
I spoke to you that day.
Red Skull.
I spoke to you that day that it happened.
Yeah.
The magical
super Nazi.
Floating Nazi or whatever.
Yeah. Well, it was shocking, right? It was very shocking.
And then Olivia Wilde.
Yeah. That was shocking too.
Yeah. There's a litany of
yes. Well, and it became increasingly preposterous. And the Olivia Wilde episode was that was so preposterous that it was almost immediately
But
laughable.
I think mercifully that film was so badly made, and I'm pretty sure that she'd cast her boyfriend as got rid of someone that was super competent and put somebody in that was pretty incompetent. And I think that kind of caused it to flub. But yeah, man, the enemy thing, I've ended up becoming really good friends with one of my harshest critics. It's so strange, and yet it makes complete sense afterward. You had
How did you end up making friends?
So I got criticized by a pair of podcasters who do this. They kind of take down or they have a very critical eye of much of the podcasting world, and they did an episode about an episode that I'd done, and they have a right of reply thing.
Oh yeah.
Sam's been on to do it. Who else has been on to do it? I did it. A couple of other, Konstantin Kissin's been on to do it, and I went on, and there was a bit of like, I listened to their show. I think it's a very illuminating way to see how people that have a different perspective about what's going on in your world see it. And I was like, yeah, I got the opportunity to go on and have a conversation, and I did. And I found them to both be like way more charming than I thought that they were going to be. And I've ended up, both Chris and Matt, although Matt less so, but with Chris, like, we must speak once a month, every couple of weeks. One of us will just ring and we'll catch up about what's been going on in the world. And he has a very different sort of worldview to me. He lives in a different area of the world. He's a psychologist studying religion, I think, and sacred rituals and stuff like that, rituals rather than religion. And now he points out blind spots that I don't see. And that one particular instance it was really uncomfortable, because this was 3 years ago or something now maybe, and I'm still super uncomfortable about it. And oh my God, these people are going to take me down, and they're both academics, and they're really, really well educated, and they're going to be smart, and they're going to say things that make me look silly. And I said things that made me look silly, and picked a particular episode where blah, blah, blah. And yet, in reflection, it's been that one instance, and the subsequent rumination about it was one of the biggest inflection points for me, going from having blind spots that I hadn't seen to that. And I almost think that the degree of discomfort that I went through was mandatory, because had I have not felt so much like fear and anxiety and embarrassment about the fact that it's going to be out there, and there's going to be all this focus and attention in not a nice way, and there'll be tweets and all the rest of this stuff, that was sufficiently uncomfortable to force me to actually genuinely look at the things that I was doing that I was getting wrong. And I'm sure that there's a million things I'm still getting wrong. But yeah, it was as much a gift as it could be. We'll get back to talking to Jordan in 1 minute, but first I need to tell you about Element. I've used Element every single morning for over 3 years now. It is the way I start every single day. It tastes fantastic. It optimizes my hydration. It helps to regulate my appetite, and it improves my brain health. Element contains a science-backed electrolyte ratio of sodium, potassium, and magnesium. Best of all, they've got a brand new chocolate caramel flavor, which you can have hot. Hot Element, I hear you say. What sort of hydration blasphemy is this? But no, it tastes fantastic, and on cold mornings, It's perfect. There is a no BS, no questions asked refund policy, so you can buy it and try it completely risk-free. And if you do not like it for any reason, they will give you your money back and you don't even need to return the box. I've used this every single morning for as long as I can remember, and that orange flavor is phenomenal. Plus, that chocolate caramel is available right now if you go to the link in the show notes below or head to drinklmnt.com/modernwisdom for a free sample pack of all 8 flavors with your first box. That's drinklmnt.com/modernwisdom. Here's another thing. I spoke to David Goggins about this last year, about how I was bullied as a kid and I was quite unpopular in school and I was an only child. So I didn't really have many people to back me up, in the schoolyard or whatever. And I, for a long time, had a chip on my shoulder about the kids that mistreated me in school, as you might expect. And then I got toward, maybe a few years ago, and I really, really started to reflect on it and realized that so many of the things that I valued in myself were the light side of something dark that had been created during that time in school. So my complete preparedness to just spend time on my own means that I don't mind about moving out to a country where I don't know anybody and trying to make this podcast thing work, or spending hours and hours working or researching or recording podcasts or doing intros or whatever it is. Like all of those things. Not having a super tight social network as a kid meant that I wasn't beholden to anybody when I grew up, that I didn't feel the need to have as much support as I go along to do stuff. Now, other sides of it haven't been so great because I still seek validation. I still seek a lot of validation because that was something that I was missing as a kid. But yeah, realizing not only you probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the things that you went through. Okay, there's step 1. And then step 2 is, and I'm quite grateful for what I've done. And then step 3 would be something like, wow, I'm proud of myself for having turned something that was negative into something that's positive. But then another level above that would be, wow, so maybe I should be thankful.
Yeah, right. Well, we were talking earlier in the podcast about what is the appropriate attitude towards the future. And I would say, well, we could put past, present, and future in the same bin. Say, well, one of the things that you want to do is practice gratitude. That's one of the primary religious rituals, you might say, is the practice of gratitude. And you might say, well, my life is so horrible. What do I have to be grateful for? And I would say that's for better or worse, that's still a form of blindness, right? I mean, people can have very, very difficult situations, can be in very, very difficult situations. And it's in those difficult situations where the search for gratitude becomes something that is by necessity deeper and more difficult. But that doesn't mean it's not appropriate. And there is a very tight association between loving your enemy and being grateful in spite of the terrible things that occur in your life. I've been writing about the book of Job, and Job is a story of unjust suffering, fundamentally. God deems Job a good man. So we have it on God's word that Job is actually a good man. And then all hell breaks loose, partly because God makes a bet with Satan, which is, a hell of a thing to do, and says, do your worst. He's not going to turn on me no matter what you do. And so Job, despite his torment, he becomes very ill. He loses everything he has. His friends, he becomes ill in a way that's disfiguring. His friends come around and laugh at him and tell him that he's a bad man, and that's why all these terrible things have been happening to him. And it's brutal. And Job refuses to lose faith in himself. He says, look, I'm not perfect. But as far as men go, I've done what I should do, and I'm not being punished in some manner that's obviously related to my sin. It's more like the random play of tragic forces in the world. I'm not going to lose faith in myself no matter what. And I'm also not going to, his wife says, shake your fist at God, curse him and die. Because things have gone so badly for Job, she thinks that's all that's left to him, and he refuses to do that. So he maintains faith regardless of what's happened to him. And that's really the moral of the story of Job, which is that you are morally obligated to maintain faith no matter what happens to you. And there's a practical side to that. So imagine that God and Satan conspire against you. There'll be times in your life where it feels like that's happening. And then imagine that your reaction to that is to become bitter and resentful and hostile. Well, then whatever hell you're in, merely as a consequence of the confluence of tragic events, you have opened a whole other hell underneath it. The hell of bitterness and resentment and ingratitude. And that turns into the desire for revenge very, very quickly. If you think things are bad just because they're bad, you wait till you see how bad they can become if you allow yourself to be corrupted by your unjust suffering, right? And so I do think that this is the most practical possible advice that can be given to people, which is that you are morally required to maintain faith, to aim up, and to treat other people the way you would want to be treated, no matter what's happened to you. And that's a hell of a thing to say. And, you might say, well, that's impossible. Some people have such brutal lives that they're destined to be corrupt. But I would say that's not true. Like, I've met many people, particularly in my clinical practice, who had lives that were so brutal that you couldn't even listen to them without it like breaking you into pieces. Brutal childhoods of a depth of malevolence you can hardly conceptualize, who decided despite that they were going to aim up and they were going to maintain faith in themselves and the world.